old girl walked barefoot across a baseball field, chasing fireflies in the dark. Minutes later, she was gone. No screams. No struggle. No witnesses who saw exactly what happened. Used silence. For nearly 30 years, her disappearance haunted a small Arkansas town and broke a mother's heart in ways few people could imagine. Investigators chased hundreds of leads. They interviewed suspects. They searched fields and forests. But nothing brought Morgan home. 10 decades later, detectives reopened the evidence. Inside an old pickup truck, they found something that had been sitting there all along. A single strand of hair. And what that tiny piece of evidence revealed, may finally explain what happened to 6-year-old Morgan Nick. This case haunted an entire community for decades. And what investigators discovered years later, changed everything they thought they knew. Stay with me, because this story becomes more disturbing the deeper you go. Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy true stories that stay with you long after the video ends, consider subscribing. Because some stories deserve to be remembered. And Morgan's story is one of them. Later in this story, you'll hear about a man police questioned in 1995. A man who owned a red pickup truck. A man who tried to abduct another little girl, months before Morgan disappeared. Investigators spoke to him. Then let him go. What they discovered decades later, suggests that decision may have cost them the truth for nearly 30 years. June 9, 1995, was an ordinary summer evening in the small town of Alma, Arkansas. The air was warm. The sky was clear. And the sounds of baseball echoed across the local ball field. Families gathered in lawn chairs along the sidelines. Parents talked and laughed. Children ran freely in the open grass. It was the kind of place where neighbors trusted each other. The kind of town where parents felt safe letting their children wander just a little too far. Among the families there that night, was a young girl named Morgan Nick. Morgan had bright blonde hair and an easy smile. She was full of curiosity and energy. The kind of child who made friends quickly. The kind of child who trusted people easily. Her mother had brought her to watch a baseball game that evening. Nothing unusual. Nothing especial. Just another summer night. Morgan played with two friends near the edge of the field. They chased each other through the grass. They laughed and ran barefoot through the dirt. At one point, the girls began chasing fireflies as darkness settled over the field. Small glowing lights drifting through the warm night air. The kind of moment that feels magical when you're 6 years old. To Morgan, it was just another adventure. But that innocent moment would become the last normal memory anyone had of her. Because while Morgan and her friends were laughing in the dark, someone nearby was watching. At some point during the evening, Morgan and her friends walked toward the edge of the parking area near the ball field. There was a patch of sand and dirt where the children had been playing. Morgan had sand in her shoes. She sat down to shake it out. Her friends stood nearby. Talking. Waiting. Then they saw a man. He was sitting close to the children's area. Quiet. Watching. None of the girls recognized him. One of the children later said the man spoke to them briefly. Another said something about him felt strange. Uncomfortable. The kind of feeling children sometimes can't explain. But nothing happened right then. No one screamed. No one ran. After a few minutes, Morgan's friends decided to go back to the baseball field. They expected Morgan to follow. She stayed behind for just a moment longer. Just long enough to finish emptying the sand from her shoes. It would only take a few seconds. But when the girls looked back, Morgan wasn't coming. At first, they didn't think much of it. Children wandered off all the time. Maybe she went to find her mother. Maybe she went to the restroom. Maybe she followed someone she knew. But Morgan never returned. And within minutes, the normal sounds of that summer night began to change. Because someone realized Morgan was missing. And that realization would mark the beginning of one of the most haunting child disappearance cases in American history. At first, no one believed anything serious had happened. Children wandered away all the time. Especially at ball games. Someone assumed Morgan had gone to the restroom. Another thought she might be near the concession stand. Her mother began walking across the field, calling her name. Morgan. No answer. She checked near the bleachers. Nothing. She asked other parents. No one had seen her. That uneasy feeling, the quiet fear that begins as a whisper, started growing stronger. Her mother searched faster now. Across the grass. Behind parked cars. Near the dugouts. Still nothing. Then came the moment every parent fears. The moment when hope begins to slip away. Morgan wasn't anywhere. Not at the ball field. Not near the parking lot. Not with friends. She had vanished. And within minutes, the relaxed summer atmosphere turned into panic. Parents joined the search. People spread out across the area calling her name. Flashlights appeared. Voices echoed through the darkness. But there was only silence. Someone finally made the call. Police were on the way. And that quiet ball field in Alma would never feel safe again. Police arrived quickly. At first, officers treated the situation as a missing child case. They believed Morgan might be hiding nearby. Or lost in the surrounding area. But as minutes turned into hours, the situation began to feel different. More serious. More urgent. Officers started interviewing witnesses. Parents described where they had last seen Morgan. Children described the man near the sand area. And slowly, a picture began to form. A stranger had been near the children that night. A man no one recognized. A man who didn't belong there. Some witnesses said he appeared to be watching the kids. Quietly. Carefully. As if he were waiting for something. That detail changed everything. Because if a stranger had been watching Morgan, then her disappearance might not have been an accident. It might have been planned. And that realization sent a chill through everyone who was there. Search teams expanded outward. Fields were checked. Roads were patrolled. Nearby woods were searched. Volunteers joined the effort. People who had never met Morgan showed up to help. Because when a child disappears, an entire community feels it. But despite the growing search, there was still no sign of Morgan Nick. No footprints leading away. No discarded clothing. No clear trail. It was as if she had simply disappeared into the night. And then, a witness remembered something important. Something investigators would never forget. Several witnesses described seeing a vehicle parked near the edge of the ball field. It wasn't unusual at first. There were many cars there that night. But this vehicle stood out in memory later. A dull red pickup truck. Older model. Worn paint. Parked near the area where Morgan had last been seen. One witness remembered the truck leaving the area around the time Morgan disappeared. Another said they noticed a man walking toward it. At the time, it didn't seem important. Used another vehicle leaving after the game. But once Morgan was reported missing, a truck became something else entirely. It became a mystery. Investigators began searching for the vehicle. They interviewed residents. They checked records. They asked anyone who might have seen it. But information was limited. Descriptions varied. And without a license plate, tracking the truck would prove difficult. Still, detectives believed the truck might be connected to Morgan's disappearance. It may have been the last place she was seen. Or the vehicle used to take her away. And if that was true, then Morgan may have been taken in less than a minute. In a crowded place. Surrounded by families. without anyone realizing what had happened. But what investigators didn't know yet was that the owner of a truck matching that description had already come to their attention. And years later, they would realize just how close they had come to solving the case in the very beginning. As investigators continued interviewing witnesses, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Several people described the same type of man. Middle-aged. Rough appearance. Unfamiliar to the community. Quiet. Watching the children. And again, the same detail kept appearing in their statements. A dull red pickup truck. Detectives began checking records for trucks matching the description. And before long, one name surfaced. A local man who owned a vehicle that closely matched what witnesses described. A man with a troubling history. A man who had already come into contact with police before. That man was Billy Jack Links. At the time, he didn't stand out as a major suspect. Just another person investigators wanted to talk to. But years later, many would wonder if the truth had been sitting right in front of them all along. Because Billy Jack Links wasn't just a man with a red truck. He had already been accused of trying to take another child. Just months before Morgan disappeared, a young girl reported a frightening encounter. She told investigators a man had tried to pull her into a pickup truck. She fought back. She screamed. And somehow, she escaped. The girl described the vehicle. An older red pickup truck. She described the man. Rough-looking. Dirty clothing. Unkempt appearance. When police investigated that earlier incident, they identified the driver as Billy Jack Links. He was questioned. But the case did not lead to an arrest connected to Morgan's disappearance. At the time, there wasn't enough evidence. Just suspicion. Just similarities. Just a feeling that something wasn't right. And so, the investigation moved forward. But the possibility remained. What if Morgan's disappearance wasn't random? What if someone had already been searching for a victim? Someone who had tried before, and failed? Because if that was true, then Morgan may not have been the first child he targeted. And she may not have been chosen by chance. Police questioned Links during the early days of the investigation. He denied any involvement. He denied being near the children. He denied taking Morgan. Investigators searched his property. They examined his truck. But the technology of the 1990s was limited. Evidence that might be tested today could not be fully analyzed back then. Nothing definitively linked him to the disappearance. No witness could positively identify him. No physical evidence proved Morgan had been in his vehicle. So eventually, he was released. And the investigation continued in other directions. But for some detectives, the doubts never disappeared. Because something about the case didn't sit right. Something about the man with the red truck lingered in the background of the investigation. Like a question that had never been answered. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The intense search slowly quieted. Tips continued coming in but none led to Morgan. There were reported sightings across different states. None confirmed. There were suspects investigated and ruled out. False leads. False confessions. Dead ends. The case that once dominated headlines began to fade from national attention. New stories replaced old ones. New tragedies filled the news. But for Morgan's family, time stood still. Her bedroom remained untouched. Her belongings stayed where she left them. Every birthday passed with unanswered questions. Every holiday carried a quiet sadness. While investigators moved on to new cases, one person never stopped searching. Morgan's mother refused to give up hope. And years later, her determination would help keep the investigation alive long enough for a discovery no one expected. Because decades after Morgan disappeared, investigators would reopen the evidence. And what they discovered inside that old red pickup truck would shock even experienced detectives. As the years passed, the world kept moving forward. New families moved into town. Children grew up. Baseball seasons came and went. But for Morgan's family, time never truly moved on. Every year brought the same painful reminders. Birthdays that should have been celebrated. School years that should have begun. Milestones that never came. While investigators followed new cases, one person refused to let Morgan's story fade. Her mother, Colleen Nick, held on to hope long after many others believed answers might never come. She spoke at events. She shared Morgan's story. She met with investigators again and again. And she kept Morgan's name alive. Because for a parent, giving up hope is not an option. Even when years turn into decades. Even when the silence becomes unbearable. Colleen believed that somewhere, someone knew the truth. And someday, a truth would come out. Morgan's disappearance touched families across the country. Parents saw their own children in her photographs. They imagined how quickly a normal evening could turn into a nightmare. Television programs shared her story. Newspapers printed her picture. Missing child posters appeared in stores and post offices. Tips came in from across the United States. Some callers believed they had seen Morgan. Others believed they knew who had taken her. Investigators followed every possible lead. But again and again, the results were the same. Nothing. No confirmed sightings. No solid evidence. No answers. And as the years passed, the mystery only deepened. Because the longer Morgan remained missing, the more impossible it seemed to find the truth. Until investigators decided to look back at what they already had. Decades after Morgan disappeared, detectives reopened the case. Old files were pulled from storage. Boxes of evidence were brought out again. Witness statements were reviewed. Photographs were studied. Reports were reread. Investigators began seeing the case with fresh eyes. And one piece of evidence stood out. The red pickup truck once owned by Billy Jack Lynx. Years earlier, police had searched that vehicle. At the time, nothing conclusive had been found. But investigators knew something important had changed. Technology. Modern forensic testing could reveal details that were impossible to detect in 1995. Evidence that once seemed useless might now hold answers. And that realization led detectives back to the truck. Back to the place where Morgan might have been, nearly 30 years earlier. The truck had been stored for years. Old. Unused. Almost forgotten. Dust covered the surfaces. Time had left its marks. But investigators treated it like a time capsule. A frozen moment from 1995. Carefully, they searched it again. Seats. Floorboards. Door panels. Every inch examined. Every surface tested. Looking for anything that might connect the vehicle to Morgan. For a long time, it seemed like nothing would be found. Then investigators noticed something small. Something easy to miss. A single strand of light-colored hair. Barely visible. Trapped within the interior of the truck. The kind of evidence that might have gone unnoticed in earlier searches. But this time, they preserved it. Carefully. Because modern DNA testing could answer a question that had haunted investigators for decades. Had Morgan Nick been inside that truck? And if the answer was yes, it would mean detectives had been closer to the truth than anyone realized. That tiny strand of hair had been sitting in that truck for nearly 30 years. Waiting. Waiting for science to catch up. Waiting for investigators to look again. And when the test results finally came back, everything changed. The evidence was finally ready. After nearly 3 decades, investigators had something real. Something tangible. Something that might finally answer the question that had haunted this case from the beginning. Had Morgan been inside that truck? The strand of hair was carefully analyzed. Modern forensic technology could detect details that investigators in 1995 could only dream of. Scientists worked quietly behind laboratory doors. Detectives waited. Morgan's family waited. And for the first time in years, there was a feeling that real answers might finally be close. But DNA testing takes time. Weeks passed. 10 months. Every phone call brought anticipation. Every update brought tension. Because everyone understood what the results might mean. If the hair belonged to Morgan, then investigators would finally know something that had remained uncertain for decades. They would know she had been taken in that truck. They would know the man they questioned years earlier might have been responsible all along. And they would know the truth had been within reach from the very beginning. Then in 2024, the results finally came back. Detectives gathered quietly. The atmosphere was tense. Years of unanswered questions led to this moment. The report confirmed what investigators had long suspected. The hair found inside the truck was consistent with Morgan. After nearly 30 years, there was now strong evidence suggesting she had been inside that vehicle. For investigators, it was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. A breakthrough, because it answered one of the biggest questions in the case. But heartbreak, because it also pointed toward a truth no family ever wants to face. Morgan had likely been abducted from that ball field in a matter of seconds. Taken away in a truck that drove off into the night. Gone before anyone realized what had happened. And the man investigators questioned early in the case remained the strongest suspect. But time had taken away the possibility of direct answers. Because the man believed responsible was no longer alive to face justice. And the person who may have known the truth best would never be questioned again. Today, investigators believe Morgan's disappearance was not random. They believe someone came to that ball field with a plan. Someone who had watched before. Someone who understood how quickly a child could be taken. Witnesses remembered a man sitting quietly near the children. Watching. Waiting. Not interacting with other families. Not watching the game. Just watching the kids. And when Morgan was left alone for just a few seconds, that opportunity may have been all he needed. Investigators now believe the abduction likely took less than a minute. One moment she was shaking sand from her shoes. The next, she was gone. Taken in a way so quick and quiet, no one understood what had happened until it was too late. It was a crime that changed a community forever. Because it shattered the belief that small towns were always safe. It showed how quickly an ordinary evening could turn into tragedy. And it left a question that still remains unanswered. What happened to Morgan after she was taken? Even with new evidence, the search for Morgan has never stopped. Investigators continue following leads. Tips still come in, search efforts continue whenever new information emerges. Because one question still remains. Where is Morgan? Her family continues to hope that someday, she will be brought home. That someday, they will finally have answers. Not just about who took her. But about what happened after she disappeared. Because closure is something every family deserves. And Morgan's story is not finished until that day comes. Morgan's disappearance changed lives far beyond one family. Her story helped raise awareness about child safety. Parents became more cautious. Communities became more watchful. And her mother turned grief into purpose. Helping other families facing the same nightmare. Making sure missing children are never forgotten. Because even after decades, Morgan's story still matters. It matters to investigators. It matters to families. And it matters to the people who continue searching for answers. Some mysteries are solved quickly. Others take years. And some take a lifetime. But as long as Morgan's story is told, she is never truly forgotten. Imagine being at that ball field that night. Just a few minutes away. Hearing children laugh. Seeing families relax. Believing everything was safe. Then learning a child had vanished without a trace. Do you think investigators were close to solving this case from the very beginning? Or do you believe there are still secrets that haven't been discovered? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this matter to you,